I'm indeed happy because I can start by picking up this term that was introduced earlier in one of the papers on the birth of physics, how the Latin term of this kind of massive materiality in Lucrece was materia copia. There is a whole genealogy of the term of copia, copiousness, and to copy in a materialist sense, which is very different from fabricating an identical copy. No? So from the quest that through copying one seeks to identify with the object or the thing that is being copied. Etymologically, the term literally stands for the plenty. So the Latin term copiare meant to transcribe or to write in plenty. And it is this aspect indeed, which was very important for my own work on Michel Serres. So let me start by pointing out this wonderful book series, which is edited by Joanna Hodge and David Webb. Michel Serres Material Futures. It's published by Bloomsbury Academic, and the monograph on Michel Serres, whose title now is not actually as I would have chosen, no? But my title, I understood, was not very marketable, but it's important to me because it relates to this copiousness. So if in an ideal world, I could have set the title for my book, it would have been Ultimate Capital, referring to the sun, no? From the Parasite. The sun is the ultimate capital in Michel Serres. So Ultimate Capital, Cornucopian Mathematics, and the Price of Information. And this is because this relation between information and mathematics begins to attend, at least that is my interest, or one of the main interests in my work on Serres, to a new notion of the transcendental. Serres speaks of the objective transcendental. And it is this notion that I would like to begin with, perhaps, to try to address it in a certain way, because it is a transcendental which allows us to take a stance in what I call the out with. It is this out with that allows us to find novel manners. I have called this in my book, novel manners of witnessing events and happenings. So it's an out with, and the interest in this out with, and also in this objective kind of the transcendental, has to do with something that François Julien captured really nicely in a recent book entitled The Book of Beginnings in the English translation, where he writes, as long as European reasoning refuses to and recategorize itself, that is to reconsider what is implicit in it, to question it and to probe its obviousness, it cannot effectively access an elsewhere, another way of thinking. And philosophy, despite its doubt, will no longer be able to be self-reflective. So very often today, we feel that categories are really what we should let go of. Categories, they are violent, they are conquering things. But here is a dimension of the categorical, which I think is very crucial and which lies behind this interest in a transcendental, or in a relation between a cornucopian mathematics and an information science, which works with the rationalization and with a certain notion of always paying a price, no? In the richness of how something can be named or referred to or preserved in conversations. So then, as a motto, perhaps to keep a bit in the backs of our minds throughout my talk, if relations must be made while classes can be owned, categories demand the stepping out of one's self without letting go of it. Categories demand the wearing of covers, clothes of fashions and faces with mimic, carved from acting according to policy, tact, and politeness. So I have singled out 3 citations that help to give us a first common reference, let's say, at least an ideational reference to such a transcendental line between a copiousness, between the copiousness of information and a cornucopian mathematics. The first one is from Serres' book on Leibniz. He cites Leibniz in this book. And he says, my philosophy, so this is Leibniz, my philosophy is based on two sayings as vulgar as that of the Italian theater. Now, this is the Commedia dell'Arte, the theme, the motif that I picked up in the title of my lecture here. So, as vulgar as that of the Italian theater, that it is elsewhere as it is here. And this other saying by Tas, che per variar natura è bella, which seem to contradict each other, but which must be reconciled by hearing one from the bottom of things and the other from manners and appearances. No? So nature is beautiful in that it varies, and it is here just as it is elsewhere as well. These two sentences, they get like two different directions. One, Leibniz is saying, is coming from the bottom of things, and the other is coming, we could say, no, out of the sky, from the manners and appearances. The second citation I would like to relate to this is from Statues, the second book of Foundations by Serres. He says, if one gives the word logic a broad and deep enough meaning for it to say everything that concerns the logos in general, then here are two dual or contraposed logics. The absence of any treatise on sculpture is due to this transcendental silence, placing statues outside the logos. So with this, we come closer to my interest in this transcendental. So the transcendental, we can think, needs to be like bounded from two sides at once. So two dual or contraposed logics. So this transcendental is being approximated is not right. It's really more like molded out. We will see this relation to sculpture. I will come back to this. But it is essentially a place of silence. This I find important. So it's a notion of the transcendental, which relates to statues. Serres will argue in the same book that we need what he calls a general treatise on statues, on sculpture, in such a way that the statues themselves could be placed inside the logos, not outside the logos. And such a notion of statues that are placed inside a logos, whose logics always comes in a dual and in a counterpoint and in a sculptural kind of way, such statues are, I believe, what Serres calls objects. So when he says, no, we need to, philosophy should reconsider itself, we as thinkers in philosophy should learn to reconsider ourselves always as objects in a world among other objects. So this does not do away with the notion of the subject. I will come back to this, but it says in so far as we are going to attend, to address, to relate to each other conceptually, so in philosophy, formally as well, we should think of ourselves as much as of everything else as objects living convivially in a world among objects. So this is a notion of objects which does not have the security of a coordinated space within which they would be commensurate. This will be an important point in a moment. So it's a notion of objects which basically come from 1,000 different places and don't really live in one uniform or homogeneous kind of world. But we will see how the notion of the universal is crucial precisely in such a sense that is not a uniform sense. So then let's look at the third of the motifs that I want to place in the beginning of this talk. It's again from the Leibniz book by Michel Serres, where he writes, fortunately, Leibniz's system is made so that continually and in a single movement, it constructs itself and speaks of itself. It forms itself and describes its formation so that it intertwines its semantics and its syntax. Michel Serres' book on Leibniz has been quite provocative in how it made a case, Michel Serres made a case, saying that Leibniz's philosophy is actually systematic, but the notion of systematicity works by analogy. So it's an analogous system, one where the two planes or the two reference of the analogy, they can never be brought to cover each other. And precisely because they can never be brought to cover each other, the whole thing is a system. It's a system which is quick, which is alive, which is active, and lends itself so well to relate to our concerns today with the environment and with environmental humanities, and the way that ecology, or in the plural, no, ecologies, would be at play within that. So what is also important is that then such a system which works in analogy, no? So it's the same idea that will guide Michel Serres in his natural contract, where he says the real and the rational, we should not think of them as one subjecting the other, no, as a rationalism which would dominate the real, or as a realism which would reserve for itself the right to always dominate rationalization. But rather, he says, and that's the key notion for me in his notion of contract there, the rational and the real need to be regarded as equipollent. And equipollent, it's not the same like equivalent or equal or equally valid, no, equivalent. So equipollent is all of that. And all of that without reducing one. So it's not that equivalency could be reasoned according to equality. So they are like different scales that play always together and cannot be again brought to cover each other commensurably. So there are different scales in play, and how to think of such scales. This is the main interest with the notion of mathematics for me in Serres' approach. This is why I call it a cornucopian mathematics, because in mathematics we don't have syntax and we don't have semantics. These things, they come when we relate mathematics to logics, and through logics to a project of giving foundations for mathematical speculation, for mathematical abstractions. But by placing such a line of a transcendental that can always only be bounded from two sides at once in a sculptural way, such that these objects that can live in a world, in a convivial world as objects among objects, are being sculpted out. No, such that statues can be placed inside the logos, because the logics that relates to this logos, to the domain of this logos, is always a dual one, and even one that stands in delicate balances, that is not in equilibrium with itself, so a contrapposto stance. Good. This line, how can we think of it? I have here a citation from Quatremer de Quincy, who wrote in the 18th century in Enlightenment, a dictionary with respect to architectural languages. It is in many aspects a remarkable book, also because it's at the same time when Enlightenment science produces the encyclopedia by d'Alembert and Diderot, which organizes all the knowledge of the world into a structure which is to mimic the faculties of the human mind. So it's the first encyclopedia which organizes everything according to what at that time was referred to as the three faculties of thinking, which is memory, which is imagination, and which is reason, rationality. The point of Quatremer de Quincy is that architecture cannot fit within that structure. It cannot fit within that structure because the invention with which it works is creative. No, it's creating, it's inventive, it's working in a way that that needs to be attended differently. So he says, theory, and he is specifically teaching of architecture, but I think he also means it in a more general sense, at least my interest in it is like that. He says, the object of all theory is to teach. So theory is not to explain something. Theory is not to give legitimization of something. Or it is about giving instructions, but this giving of instructions is not primarily about reproducing, no, so the copying in a sense that would strive to identify what it copies, but rather there is a self-referential dynamics proper to teaching. He says the object of all theory is to teach. One can only teach what can be proved. One proves only to the reason and the understanding. If, therefore, it is required that sentiment should be convinced by reasoning, sentiment will require an explanation, a proof of every proof. there is on every subject a limit to all reasoning, which limit theory is bound to respect, and which it would be imprudent to go beyond. There commences the unsolvable. Farther we cannot go. It is the mathematical line. It is the region of the imaginary where reason quits us and whither none can follow us. It is also that of Icarus, where the wings of the mind too frequently abandon him. So he places this notion of the mathematical line with respect to theory, so the teaching being the object of all theory. So teaching is about figuring out how, theory is about figuring out how something we want to teach that cannot be reasoned properly can become the object of conveying, of being conveyed. So Quatrième de Cassis emphasizes this limit, this prudent limit, this prudency with regard to the mathematical line. And I think this is at stake with our new physics today, with quantum physics, because it allows us to relate to such limit theories differently than it was the case in the 18th century. So one striking example, and it's from a recent experience actually that I had. I was calling somebody who was in China, and I was talking to a physics friend that I have, with whom I frequently collaborate. And then he pointed out to me how remarkable it is that my words, instantly now spoken here, are instantly hearable at the other side of the world. And how this works is by translating acoustic signals into light. Light moves at light speed, so it's instantly by the ways that we relate to time today, that we measure time. It's instantly there, and it can be translated back into acoustic signals and so forth. So there is a notion of space by conveying communication, which has nothing to do with distances, because it goes through light. And this, the medium of light as the medium of communication, of transport, of signals, is what makes the digital and electric and electronic so powerful, because everything can be translated into light. Everything, even energy, can be translated into light and sent in almost no time around the world. So there is a kind of a physics of communication which we can't properly reason. So what explanations can we give for it? And yet it establishes the global domain, the global space in which we live, in which our lives are organized today, with the global logistics and the networks. So this is an aspect where, yes, okay, the mathematical line cannot be properly reasoned, but we need to learn again from metaphysics how to relate to it, how to be in touch with that. And this, so to return or to attend again to metaphysics in order to make sense, to teach what the physics of today, which poses all these troubling problems for our inherited logics. This is the cornucopian mathematics I want to talk about. Yeah, so we attend again to metaphysics, not because we want to lose the space of proof and of evidence and of reasoning and understanding in science, but because the two cannot be brought entirely to cover each other. And teaching has a lot to do with how to stabilize this gap. This is, in my understanding, why the natural contract is to a very significant part an issue of ethics. But this will not be the main interest now, but rather it is this inclusion of the harmonic in a mathematical sense. The harmonic in a mathematical sense, because it's a mathematics of harmonics, which allows us to convey the signals of my voice in no time to wherever on the planet. This harmonics has something to do now, or in relation to the topic of the teaching that I am picking up from Quatremer de Quincy, with what in pre-modern science was always addressed through the liberal arts, their impersonations. And here in this particular painting that I'm showing you, specifically of thinking as, to think of the liberal arts as disciplines. So the arts are impersonated disciplines that can convey knowledge. And here what we have is, you see, we have arithmetic, we have geometry, we have music, we have astrology, we have logics or dialectics, we have rhetorics, and we have grammar. And the crucial thing now is that every one of these figures is double. So we have on the one hand the figure with the instrument that is proper for it, but then it is doubled by somebody who holds a book. So it's about how can the skill, how can the ableness of the liberal arts, so what they empower us to acquire, to obtain, to learn, how can that be taught? How can it be conveyed? Text and writing is a crucial aspect of this. We will again come back to that. In all of the cases, except with music. You see, with music, the doubled figure is not one which sits with a book in their hands, but it's a hammersmith. And this is the reason. So the reason why this is so is that harmonics is very important. And as legend goes, Pythagoras, to him we owe the reasoning of harmonics in mathematical terms. So he linked the fourths, so the cycle of the fifth, so the harmonic compositional thinking with number and with number theory. And legend goes that he came to think in this way while walking by a hammersmith who produced sounds that could be strangely consonant, but also strangely dissonant. So this is what apparently seems to have triggered Pythagoras' inventiveness, his thinking, when he developed what today we call number theory and mathematics of harmonics. So this is a bridge, you could say, which stands for this figure of the not, it cannot be brought to cover. No, so these two bounding domains that allow us to figure out objects in the transcendental silently, so mathematically, they cannot be brought to cover. On the one, there is reality. We have the physical sounds of the hammersmith. And on the other, there is the rationalization of the sounds through instruments. So instruments are very important. Books for the conveying are very important, and a bridgeable but unclosable gap between the real and the rational. Now, in this painting, there is more, because all of these figures, the 7 disciplines, so the liberal arts portrayed as disciplines in this double sense of what they can teach needs to be conveyed through time in writing, not just in live witnessing, no, in learning, like when you study with a master and you watch every one of her moves, such as to become able to do it yourself. So in a more impersonal way through writing, and they are arranged, they are sitting here as if they are a canon, and the canon in the sense now not of an authoritative list of references, but as an instrument, which is again something that comes from Pythagoras, namely the monochord. So this one instrument that can produce, that gives us the rationality of harmonics. The monochord, you can think of it like this, no? It's one string which is bounded in different proportions and produces the entire space of the sounds that can be rationalized in harmonics. Now, these sounds, they open up a kind of a space of coexistence, no? Different sounds, they can happen, they can sound in the same moment. So they don't there is no contradiction with regards to sounds keeping their distinctness while sounding in one and the same moment with others. So it's a space of bridges through time, of temporal relations that produces a wholeness which cannot be linearized into sequences of causes and effects and so on, but which produces eine Stimmung, no? A kind of an atmosphere. So this is important as a background, because within such a domain, we can now think. Here I'm showing you an excerpt from a book that I find very, very remarkable. It's a recent one by Helen Martin, who is an artist, a sculptor. She makes sculpture mainly, I think, and installations. And from what I could figure out by reading around this book, a crucial motivation for her to write this book was that as an artist, she was very unhappy with the way that art discourse is going. So how to speak about art today? She was not happy with the way we are doing criticism today. So she took 2 years and wrote this book. It's called The Boiled In Between. And this boiled in between, again, for me, it's a different way of speaking of the same. No? So this, what I call the transcendental line, and then the domain where the bounding happens from the outside and from the inside. So from a rational and from a real side, where the domain of sculpting silent words is there. Another way I think we can relate to this, what she calls the boiled in between, is the old meteorological notion of the meteora. Meteora simply meant to the pre-modern meteorologists, so natural philosophers, everything that is above the earth and below the heavens. Yeah, but above the earth and below the heavens was also the domain where things that pass through the below, so lava, for example, or that things that come from above, so ideas of religious angels or influences or spirits, they mingle with the weather. They manifest in the weather. It's a zone of the weather, we could say, where the elements transform into each other, where things are, boiled in between from a materialist point of view. And in this domain now, in the boiled in between, Helen Martin places a whole series, it's not a series, it's just a collection, it's a compendium of messers. She calls them messers, and it's not quite clear whether they're messengers or messieurs. No? I think it's deliberately ambiguous, but it doesn't matter so much for my interest. What is important is that these messers, they describe a lot of dissociated and often very, very ordinary daily events. And she thinks of them, this is what she tells us, I think, in the introduction. She says, the instruments of psychic observation. So these messengers, so the voices that speak in this boiled in between, they are instruments of psychic observation, and as such, we are not the moral function of behavior, neither analyst nor pulse. We are spectator, servant and clown. We are animal, vegetable, mineral. Our flight takes us everywhere. No? So what I like to suggest is to think of such instruments of psychic observation a bit like the liberal arts were thinking of music, of arithmetics, of geometry, of rhetorics, and so on. So they are instruments that allow a psychic observation in a way which is, it's not a moral function. No, it's not an analytical tool. So because what it produces is not necessarily something useful, also something nice, something beautiful. So they are material. So they involve physics at large, and we can relate this to this incredible, in a way, drastic and simple saying by Michel Serres that we need a notion of the universal today, because everything at all, whether a galaxy or a rock, a mineral or a parrot or a person or a sofa or a carpet, whatever we might look at, it engages in 4 universal activities, which is to receive, to store, to send, and to trade, so to process and exchange information. This is the information physics that I was so interested to work out in my book on Serres. So what we have here is a kind of an organon, no, that comes in a canonic form, so in a form of thinking of the arts as disciplines, through and in relation to how what it is that they have to teach can also be conveyed. Takes a book form. There is one prerequisite to think of such instruments of psychic, instruments as instruments of psychic observation, and that is these instruments are not neutral. We are interested and we are speaking. No? So there is a notion, so a prerequisite which cannot entirely be rationalized. So to start thinking in this direction, there must already be an interestedness. And an interestedness, it's not to achieve something or to realize something. It's not to be interested in something in particular, but it's more, we are interested as a kind of a state of unrest, of unsettledness, no? Of alertness, of a kind of a disposition. And we are speaking. No? These instruments, they talk. So they are vivid. No? They are. It's a kind of an active subject, we could say. Let's say instruments of psychic observations in this sense. Let us address them as active subjects. And of course, this object, so it would be beautiful or promising, I think, to relate this important question of agency, of an expanded sense of agency that includes, not only humans, but animal, vegetable, and mineral, so all beings, all material bodies, basically at large, through such a notion of instruments. Why instruments? I want to look a bit more, or to approach this domain of the harmonics as mathematics, which gives us this real time, of sending voices through light to another part of the world. This impressive reality. By going back to a notion that is at the core of Plato's myth, or story of the world in the Timaeus. So there is a figure of the Lambda, which is crucial for the whole way that Plato describes the building of the world making. And this Lambda is again a figure from Pythagoras, so it comes from the same thinking where number and music relate intimately and are mediated through instruments. The notion of the Lambda, because the Lambda gives this cosmos that the demiurge is architecting, is building, the aspect of soul. No? So the cosmos in antiquity basically was called the cosmos because it is an animal, so it's an animate being that has a body and a soul. And this cosmic soul, so the body and the soul dimension, they now come together in the Timaeus through the Lambda, which you see here. The Lambda is these two legs that result, or that depart from a unity in which both of these legs participate. And what you have on the one hand is the exponential series of 2, and on the other hand you have the series of exponential of the 3. And this is crucial because what you have is the 3, if you want this, mathematically speaking, is everything circular, whereas with the 2, you have everything that can be squared, that can be rationalized. And the way how the cosmos now has a body and a soul that makes it possible to learn things and to convey things about the world is that each of them participates through the unity in each other. Yeah, so there can be between these two spheres that Plato imagines, the sphere of the sensible and that of the intelligible, there can be tunings. No, there can be things can come into tune because both of them are made of the same cosmic soul and the same, if you want, they have a body that can be consonant and resonant with each other. So they also give, we will not look at it now, it goes too far, but the way how the demiurge crafts the cosmos here is by creating the harmonics into both of these spheres. And what is also important and very often told differently in the recent decades or in the 20th century decades, the demiurge is not a creator. It's an inventor, it's an architect, it's an artificer, but it's not a creator. There is nothing that he creates, in the sense. See, even here in the passage that I cite, we have God created the cosmic soul. Yeah, no, he finds it, he picks it up, and so the scene is very plastic. He mixes the same, the different, and the third, which is often called the substance, into a pot. He mixes them, which is very hard because the same and the different, they don't want to stick together, but the third needs to mediate. Then he takes it out, he elongates it into a long line, he cuts it in two, and he links end to end, and this is how he gets the two spheres that are interlocked of the sensible and the intelligible. So it's an inventor, it's not a creator. There is nothing de novo. There is nothing originary, So really, creatively originating about it. But that's maybe enough of the Lambda. The Lambda is what I wanted to point you to, because the Lambda is also what is at work in the most powerful programming language or coding environment, we must say. It's really a coding environment that we have today with Mathematica. So it's the Lambda calculus was formalized or written in a consistent form by Alonzo Church and somebody else, I forgot now who it was, in the 30s, I believe. And it marked the highest abstraction of algebra, at least for now, which can integrate everything, but algebraically. So algebra means basically we have tautology. So we have equations at the categorical level. We have equations, and there are many ways how to get to functions out of equations. And Mathematica is this mathematical environment where one can really learn almost empirically and experimentally learn to encounter, to get familiar with the abstractions of today's mathematics. And it is called the Lambda calculus. So it picks up the same idea that comes originally from Plato, where you have harmonics as a side of mathematics. So in Serres now, it's not just about a revival, of course, of the Timaeus and of the ancients' thoughts experiments, because he is very interested in not in the direct understanding between the intelligible and the sensible, but in the embodiment of it. So for Serres, it is really radically the body that thinks, insofar as he is interested to speak about thinking in terms of universality. It is always mediated through the body as a kind of an instrument. So who experiments the body? Who invents? It does. This is from his beautiful book, Variations on the Body. The way we can think of such a notion of body is a bit like an equation. So it's an organism that is quick, alive, maintains itself, and experiences world and universe in such a space of the void in between, or the meteora. There is one citation which I'm taking from the Incandescent, which gives us very quickly a kind of a better grasp on how then Serres thinks, or how we can think of a notion of the body that is quick, that can think in this way and experiment. It has to do with the role of code and with the biological, so the physics also of life. Serres writes, "My brain is composed of ancient parts, reptilian, of others as new as those chimpanzees or bonobos would develop, and then furthermore with parts that are incomparably much more recent. As such, my DNA appeared, of course, with the conjunction of my parents who built it as one shuffles cards. But in its own structure, it is more than 3 billion years old, even older still. The atoms that compose both it and me, they go back to the fabrication of hydrogen and carbon from the galactic energy of the universe. So this kind of intra-matériel software physics. That's how I have picked it notion up from there. Le logiciél intra-matériel. This is what manifests in code in such a dimension, and what it lends itself for is a new manner, not a new manner actually. It's just a manner of storytelling. It's a manner of storytelling which bridges, which links the real and the rational, let's say. But such storytelling, it is not fiction. No? It is not the other to science. It is of universality because it is working with a notion of intellect that again is something like the categories which we tend to feel uneasy today. No, we say intellect is claiming superiority. Intellect is claiming a kind of a neutrality that would be independent of a body and also then of course attributed to a male sex and so on. But this here is a citation from Simone Weil, who I have started to read her a lot in the recent years, because of course I'm looking to find other figures which kind of help to stabilize these for in many ways outrageous, audacious claims, not claims, but constellations in which Serres teaches us to think. So, and she is one of the richest and most important references or sources for me to come to terms with these difficult things. Here she writes about intelligence. She says, there is nothing which comes closer to true humility than the intelligence. It is impossible to feel pride in one's intelligence at the moment when one really and truly exercises it. And when one does so, exercise it, one is not attached to it. For one knows that even if one were to become an idiot the very next moment and remain so for the rest of one's life, truth goes on existing. So there is a reference with intelligence to a truth that is not relativistically culturally biased. No? So no, not only, always, but not only. And this is what I have tried to grasp as this cornucopian mathematics. So if mathematics is bare of making sense or of having meaning, so there is no semantics and no syntax in mathematics as mathematics, it nevertheless connects with the notion of truth and of intelligence in this way, namely an intelligence which is not one's own. Yeah, so that's the point that she's talking about. This humility comes because there is a kind of a thought, a thinking that has nothing to do with who one personally, individually, properly, culturally, historically, and so on is. So it's the mathematics that goes into an understanding of mechanisms as well, where it just doesn't matter whether one wants them to work or not. If we have a mechanism, then it works, even if we really don't want it to. Yeah. Or with geometry. So I will come to this in a moment. No? The picture that Michel Serres again and again returns to is Thales at the foot of the pyramids, no, daring to say I can measure the size of the pyramids. But this measurement, of course, would be a total offense for the Egyptians, for whom the size of the pyramid has to contain all of time that there is. No, so it's the graveyard of their kings, which form a dynasty that is to be continued until the end of the world. So this Greek coming along and saying, I can measure precisely the size of your pyramids, is like somebody comes and makes an analysis. Yeah, you know, so it's a sacrilege. But it is not in the way that Thales does it, because Thales doesn't need to say, the size is this number, or it's this value. He says, I show you a way of proportioning the size to something that we can accept as a common reference. Namely, at noon, when the sun stands in the right angle, my height will be proportional in a certain ratio to the height of the pyramid at the same moment in time. And this same proportion, and the proportion is always made of 4 terms, so it builds an analogy that has a double rationality. These 2 logos that Serres speaks of, the 2 logoses, they are transferable to anything, whenever and wherever. So this is the impersonality of intelligence that we need to hold on to if we follow Serres into this direction. Now, I want to show another reference that for me has become very interesting and very important. I encountered it through the work of Werner Hammacher, a philologist who thinks a lot about how we could strip basically the notion of an origin or an originality out of philology. And the way he does this is quite similar in gesture through attending again to a metaphysics and a physics. He says we should think of poetry as the metaphysics to philology. No, it's not how he doesn't put it in this. He says, like metaphysics is to physics, so is poetics to philology. So it's an analogy. It's a four-termed relation, or the structure, not the structure, no, the setup of an analogicity as a system. And one of the references that he returns to again and again is this speech that Paul Celan gave when he received the Büchner Prize, and where he introduced what he called the meridian poetics, a meridian poetics. And the meridian, it's about the it's about an architectonics of the world, we could say. It's a model of the world where we have the 2 poles, and then we have the equator, and then we have the meridians which go through both poles. We usually refer to only one, a singular, the meridian, but this is simply because this one line that goes through London gives us standard time. But every line, there are many meridians, just like there is not just the equator, but there is also all the latitudes. And there is a domain where now the tropicality, and this is important because of the figurativeness of speech, where the tropicality around the equator is being crossed by meridians. And the poetics that Celan is looking for, and it's a poetics which has a lot to do with this silent speech, because for every word there can be a counter word. No? Das Wort und das Gegenwort are the terms that Celan is working with. And the same with pictures, no? Das Bild und das Gegenbild, an image and a counter image. So there is always a moment of this bounding from 2 sides, such as to achieve a point of stasis. And the point of stasis is what gives us rhythm, what gives us chords. So it's like in this figure, where do I have it? Of the harmonics. So these, where the Seite, where it is being fixed, these are points of stasis. And such points of stasis are at stake with Gegenworten in Celan, with this meridian poetics, where instead of having this difficult relation between a begriff, between a concept and a metaphor, a concept and a metaphor. So how do we get to a notion of concepts without claiming there is an originality? So a first meaning of it, or a purely formal structure for it. But by being in play with the metaphorical, so the tropical line of figurative speech. This, I think, is the promise of the meridian poetics. And it changes a bit, or it shows us a certain character of art that is quite remarkable, because it's an automatic, it's a mechanic and an automatic character. So Celan writes this, he says, Die Kunst ist, Sie erinnern sich, ein marionettenhaftes, jambisch fünffüßiges, und diese Eigenschaft ist auch durch den Hinweis auf Pygmalion und sein Geschöpf mythologisch belegt, ein kinderloses Wesen. So what he says here is that art does not reproduce itself. Art does not have kids. There is no biological, genealogical reproduction to art, no? But rather, art has something rhythmic, something metrical, and something, marionettenhaft, like a puppet. No? It's being puppeteered. And the way I would like to think of it is that this puppeteering has something to do with this notion of an impersonal intelligence. So, let me perhaps first, I want to speak about this, what to do with this now, no? Or how to go further with this idea that metaphor and concepts, they can be, so what if, with the logiciél intra-matériel allows us, so this physics of information allows us to think precisely this, so not giving up that there is a distinction between words' formality or the concepts or the objectivity and their metaphoricness. But when I spoke earlier of this, this way how Serres tells us we should think of us, ourselves, as well as of everything else as objects among objects in a convivial world that doesn't have one uniform makeup, it becomes quite graspable with this idea of a meridian poetics, I think, and a figuration. But before going there, perhaps, let's look at the abstract to my talk to hold on to the key points of reference that I'm trying to link as I go on. So it's about pantomime in the cosmic convivia. You can see, no, the cosmic convivia has to do with this objective transcendental, and it's a pantomime because the way that we speak there, so one must be interested and speaking, and it must be silent talk. So pantomime literally means pan, everything, and to mime everything. So this is the copiousness that this kind of mathematical articulation pursues. So to mimic everything, but not driven by the interest to identify it. So to become one with it. But to open up a kind of a sculptural space through what such instruments of psychic observation can sound, can make up, can present acoustically. It is also characteristic then that one of the references I'm working with here is actually a musician. It's Xenakis, who had Michel Serres in his doctoral committee when he completed his PhD in composition, in music. And Xenakis was thinking of, it's almost like Michel Serres' intra-matériel hardware, but not quite. So Xenakis is thinking of, I quote him here, materials of hardness and consistency that result from various epochs of civilization, materials which move in space, have been developed, put in use, and have followed the course of ideas, colliding one against the other, influencing and annihilating one another, mutually fecundating. Xenakis calls these materials of hardness and consistency that, in a way, we can think of them like so they are accumulating traces of time. They're a bit like meteors, which travels through reality in the way that he thinks of it. And he called them alloys, mixtures, so solidifications of intellect alloys, mixtures forged by arts and sciences. And this relation now that Xenakis through music was trying to grasp, and that I think is one of the key motifs throughout Serres' engagement with information and communication, is how to think of a symbol detached from its background. How to think of that. So not the symbol which draws everything to the side of the tropical, of the figurative, of the allegorical, of the archetypical, but also not entirely decoupled from a notion of a background or a reason or an empty, so an experimental, a metrical, an objective related, a formal dimension or aspect. Serres has this notion of a methodic exteriority, precisely to address such a way of considering symbols detached from their background. When he, for example, says language, there is a genesis to language, and language comes out of noise, and it comes out of noise in a way which still has a natural philosophy aspect to it. So it's a physics, always it's a physics with their information, communication, mathematics, it relates to a physics primarily. But it is this notion of a methodic exteriority that I would like to speak about now by reading a passage from a new book I'm working on since this summer. And it tries to make more graspable this relation, this very relation. So an exteriority that would be out with, no? So, yeah. What if words were like days? So the key concern with these things is how to enter a way of thought in which one does not feel at home. If you remember the issue with categories in the beginning, no? So the West needs to and decategorize its own thinking. So how to enter a way of thought in which one does not feel at home? Doubt alone, by being undecided and of two minds, methodical or not, is not enough. We need to quantize doubt, to discretize it ekphrastically. Hesitations allow for such stepping out of one's doubt without really leaving it. Hesitations install a keeping with that is very interesting. To doubt and to hesitate, to stop or to pause, they are not the same thing. What does it depend upon if a pause acts as a stop, or if a stop turns out to have been but a pause? What if the two would not happen one after the other, but both at once? Can we grasp and keep with, in our minds, a quantum kind of state where doubt keeps its predicative content, what stands in doubt, suspended? How to think of thought as being of a kind of quickness whose temporality can only be touched upon tangentially, or with graphic symbols, semaphores, or other discretizing means that are radically exterior to what they mediate. Ingeborg Bachmann's poem Scherbenhügel gives us an image to ponder this. Lacrimonious vessels are among its motifs, and the poem speaks of the exteriority which a jar maintains to the tears it contains. So lacrimonious vessels were these little amphores that in antiquity people used to collect tears with and then to give to the grave with the person that is being mourned. So jars, in this quality of exteriority to the tears they contain, are like words are to the tears whose reality they are to grasp. August, emptied out and shell-like. Tears, one is to store them in sachets of silence, Ingeborg Bachmann suggests, in barely leaking bags that are to keep them safe, such as not to void the depth of what they express, their reality. Such bags, pocketed, are to be placed below the hill of shards, she imagines, a mountain of jars that are broken and have already let go the tears they once contained. I have an English translation of the poem, but it's not one I would publish, but it helps to follow. I will read it in German. Scherbenhügel. Vom Frost begattet die Gärten, das Brot in den Öfen verbrannt. Der Kranz aus den Erntelegenden ist Zunder in deiner Hand. Verstumm, verwahr deinen Beutel, die Worte von Tränen bestürzt, unter dem Hügel aus Scherben, der immer die Furchen schürzt. Wenn alle Krüge zerspringen, was bleibt von den Tränen im Krug? Unten sind Spalten voll Feuer, sind Flammenzungen am Zug. Erschaffen werden noch Dämpfe beim Wasser und Feuer laut, o Aufgang der Wolken, der Worte dem Scherbenberg anvertraut. Ja. So what if words were like days? It's this line here, no? Aufgang der Worte, rising of the words. How to think of something like that? Tears cannot be conceived, or can they? Ingeborg Bachmann's poem speaks of a cold kind of conception. She speaks of frost copulating with the gardens before the day dawns. She gives us a meteorological idea of conception where gardens don't burgeon with bloom and blossom, but by going silent. Still, they are still gardens, confines of peace and recreation, neither untouched nor in good control, but still strong. What stays of the tears once all jars are broken? They rise like mist, mist that sucks the meaning out of words, their breath. Mist denies the words their burial, to form no form to rise from their tombs, to be remembered as their proper presence lost. The gardens keep empty words from being put to rest. They keep them from becoming form by keeping them stored, by placing them amidst cracks filled with lambency, tongues of fire flickering from the pile of shards. Bachmann imagines jugs that are broken, tears that abscond. Cemeteries and gardens blur into a quantum state here. Still, in the double sense of the word, temporal and harmonic, they are places of peace, even if they are places of piling up of broken containers left behind. They are, the poem suggests, what is to be entrusted to conspire to keep safe the dawning of the days. Such keeping safe acts in cold conception, when the weather brings the skies intimately close to the earth. Can we think of the relation words maintain with time as if they were like days, rather than events or things carved out of a day or emplaced in one of them? How to reckon time with words when words are themselves more like days whose dawn is entrusted to a happening like the one the poem is speaking of? If words were like days, they would give birth to happenings in cyclic rhythms. Days can never be filled to fulfillment, or can they? If words were like days, they would keep what they contain in suspension, encrypted and emplaced in glyphs that are carved into time, not by taking time out, by making a void, but by inserting pauses, an atomist kind of hesitation that discretizes the swelling continuum sprayed by doubt that has turned cyclical and is being partitioned, quantized. So my notion of the stanze contrapposto tries to find a way to hold this. At the core of it is the notion of the amphora, it's almost a bit of a kitschiges motif with the lacrimonious vessels, but amphoras were also the way how Aristotle thought of the notion of place, for example. So I don't want to go into that, but hold on to the relation between words and how words could relate to time by embodying a form that is radically exterior to what the form contains, like these little vessels are in her poem. And how then to think of geometry with this interest in mind? So this impersonal cogito, no? Or actually that's too early to name it like that, but this impersonal intellect of which we spoke earlier, to Serres, it is very much related to through the gnomon itself. So through the stick, the sun clock that gives the shadows, which are then traced as a form in geometry. Now, there are, properly speaking, two bounding planes, if we want, to figure out the intellection that the gnomon is capable of. If we say this intellection is an act of interception, of physical interception. So the gnomon intercepts the course of the sun in one daily rhythm, and it intersects the course of the sun in a yearly rhythm by drawing the analemma. So we have the day and the year. And the shadows, which are the forms in geometry, they somehow bridge or relate one with the other. So this is the interest. How then to think of the formality of words in a setup where words would rise like a day does. No? So not the rise, that's the sun, but dawn like the days do. Relative or in relation to another cycle, which gives us a counting. So there's fascination, or his proposal of a chronopedia, no? So to place paideia, knowledge or wisdom, not just within a circle, but within the partitioning and the countability of the circle. It is what can be approached with such kind of ideation, I hope, at least. So let's hear how Serres actually speaks of this intellect, of this gnomon. He says, the discovery has ancient letters, no? The discovery of the gnomon. It is neuter in gender. The word gnomon, which in the Greek language designated the sundial's axis, signified that which understands, decides, judges, distinguishes, interprets, yes, that which knows. As if a thing already knew, intercepting the sunlight, its shadow writes on the dial itself a few events of the sky and of the earth, the solstice, the equinox, and the latitude of the site. It functions automatically. Automatic means without the intervention of intention, without the intervention of intention, which is subjective and cognitive. It can be said of the gnomon that it knows the way it is said that it rains. The gnomon looks like a stylus, but no one holds it in their hand. Some things of the world give themselves to be seen to an object that shows them, entirely objective. Theory does without any subject. A thing, the gnomon, intervenes in the world, and the world reads on itself the writing drawn by it. This type of intra-hardware software conditions our cognitive performances like a kind of an objective transcendental. So here we have the link now to this objective transcendental, the mathematical line, and a kind of an agency, which is not properly that of a subject. A subject in the sense of a subject that controls what happens to the object. Again, I want to bring in here a citation, a quote by Simone Weil. So Simone Weil, she wrote, I think it was her dissertation on René Descartes, the way that perception works in René Descartes, always mediated through instruments. So instruments and experiment, they form a very steady point of reference for her mystic interest, for her thinking. And here she expresses beautifully how these two things can relate for her. She writes, the value of mysteries is in experimental matter, since it resides exclusively in their infinite capacity to furnish truths that may be grasped by anyone who contemplates them for a long time with a religious attention. Hence, it is perfectly true to say that the value of Catholicism can only be gauged from the inside. But the same is just as true of any other religion, seeing that it is the repository of mysteries. How can one know whether such mysteries are capable or incapable of furnishing truth that may be grasped if one has never brought one's religious attention to bear on them? It's a similar interest that is expressed here. No? Why hold on to a notion of mathematics? If mathematics has such a long history of having been the instrument of power and of domination, why hold on to a notion of mathematics? Because it gives us an experimental context. It gives us a context where experiences can be related to formally and quantitatively, such that there can be a practice of, I would call it a comparatistic, no? By experimenting. And such a comparatistic gives a very, not a new actually, it's an old but newly revived role to philology. So philology that abstracts from drawing lines of originality and of linear descent, let's say. But philology almost as something that participates in this meteora. No? So Werner Hamacher writes, for example, philology must be practiced by anyone who speaks before all academics experts. Whoever speaks and acts in order to speak and act is doing philology, even if by another name, actively passive, related to euphoric spiritedness, but not properly a substance. So this role now of a philology or a copiousness and an experimental study of transcriptions relative to such copiousness by mathematical articulations that have no syntax and semantics. The way I would like to think of this is as the domain of the moon. No? So there is an old story, of course, which attaches intelligence to the sun, to the brightness of the sun, and then the moon, who only always reflects the brightness it receives. No? So the moon has no original brightness, it's part of the domination story of the intellect. It's part of this violent conquest that is often associated with it. Because the moon is material, the moon absorbs and it actively receives. This is the beautiful side of it. So to say that this reception and then the mirroring is not passive, there is an intellection, a bodily intellection. No? When Serres in the beginning says, who thinks? The body does. Who experiments? The body does. The body is like the moon in that sense. It perceives, it perceives, but what I wanted to say is it receives and it is active in that. So there is a spiritedness, there is an euphoricness, which I think it is that Weil is calling here a religious attention. So it's an experience. It's always embodied. So then philology is a bit like breathing. No, it's a bit like when the gnomon, is an animal. The gnomon breathes. No? So if mathematics can articulate the breath with which it makes articulations without resorting to a syntax or a semantics, is precisely philological. Perhaps, no, these are just ideas I would like to share with regard to Serres and the environmental humanities. No, everything is cyclical in the environment, and the environment, as many people have noted, is about managing. It's about counting. It's about accounting. No, different from the ecology of the three ecologies in terms of which Guattari thinks. So environment maintains a strong relation to number, to calculation. So then, breathing philology, the gnomon, this impersonal intellect that speaks of the world, how the world inscribes itself in itself. Still, it remains very difficult to imagine what to do with this. I have another part that I would like to read. It's trying to picture or trying to ideate, to get an idea of such a kind of a harmonic site. No, it's a harmonic site in the sense of the decenteredness or the multi-centeredness. And how can this multi-centeredness, or how can the harmonic and the geometric be related to each other? And there is a passage that I would like to read to you from it's on the relation between Leibniz and Serres, and how then to think of a notion of space. If space is somehow abducted out of how harmonics is translated into geometry. How can one think of a self in a fluid forest? Leibniz built a system, Serres maintains, and the system to Serres is a space. So this is crucial. The system in Serres, the analogical system, it needs an architectonics, not a logics. It needs an architectonics. It's what Serres worked out then in his book by always bringing everything to the relations of the iconography. So the architectonic, they're like categories, no? So iconography and scenography, especially. The role of orthography is too complicated to attend to it now, but it's a very crucial one. So it's the architectonic notions in which the system which works by analogy between two planes that cannot be brought to be commensurate without further efforts. No, so not purely analytically, but with something like religious attention. So it's an architectonics. That means also it's a space. Leibniz built a system, and the system is a space. If one wants to build a space, if one wants to build a system, a space, how could such building involve the pondering over, the sounding of an idea? How to make an idea clear in space? Central to such a notion of system is the relation between space and harmonics. Music unfolds in time, but if there is a bruit de fond at the bottom of things that can be heard, one cannot but attribute it to harmonics. No, but one cannot but attribute to harmonics a material base of sound, which in its synchrony is noise. But at the same time, it is also all but noise. It is sound. There is hence a rational base, and this means a doubled up, a relational base at the origin of music. Harmonics, as a branch of mathematics, is concerned with harmonic rationality, a rationality that is noted in chords, in constellations. Leibniz's system is a topological space on the level of such constellations, Serres argues when he organizes Leibniz's thought into réseaux d'étoiles, stars in a network. The topology applies not to the Earth directly. It is no immediate replacement of the role of geometry, the measuring of the planet. Rather, it brings geometry in a relation with harmonics that involves the sounding, the pondering over ideas. If building, as it is at stake here, were to be achieved by geometric construction and its schematic sequences with which mechanical work works, the intellectual work would achieve a structure that could, when finished, no longer accommodate the idea that was originally pondered over. Because being fitted in itself, the space of the work would have to deny this noisy idea to enter. It could simply not fit within the space of a particular work. It would disturb the manifest harmony of such a building structure. The same problem of representing this notion of system, a system which synchronizes between noise and sound, between a bruit de fond and the bottom of things, when articulating their appearance and manners, can be achieved neither by architecture nor by writing books. Leibniz mainly wrote opusculi, little works that tend to repeat the same with variations and that he, Michel Serres, regards as stars in a network. Serres calls this an audacity. For Leibniz, it would have been necessary to draw, not write, in order to escape the suffocation of linearity and to achieve the spatiality of the system. Serres remembers an instance when Leibniz attempted to kind of draw his system in words. So he cites Leibniz. It is almost like throwing several stones in the water at a time, each of which makes intersecting circles without destroying each other. But when the number of stones is too large, the eyes are confounding. Serres' comment on that citation is, we have to try to get lost in this fluid forest. Yeah. So this religious attention, or this making an experiment with the body, that's how I, if you want, stabilize how to think of it. Trying to get lost in a fluid forest. It's not the totality of a mystic attention. It's a mystic attention combined with experiment. And this indeed is how Serres thought of mathematics. No, he said, there is a mystics of mathematics. A mystics of mathematics. So the question then, how can one think of one's self in such a systematic spatiality, in such a confounding of eyes? There is a double cyclicity, an analog and chiastic circuitry at work in Serres Leibniz, where a cycle of architectonics is entwined with and rotates around and chiastically across a cycle of infinitesimal perceptions, appearances. So again, the picture of a meridian poetics, no? So of a place where concept and metaphor do not annihilate one another, but they also don't dominate one another. So not in one hierarchical way, but in many figurations that are being shaped out. So concept and metaphor, the tropicality of figurative articulations and the clarity of formal boundings, they, I think, should be thought about in terms of sculpture. So then, this is now a bit tentative, no? And I know it's too simple, it's too direct, it will not work directly, but there is something very interesting about the negative forms in sculpture. No? So the idea then would be that the concepts, because concepts are formal, so they relate to the objects that mingle in this convivial world of objects among objects without having a homogeneous architectonics that accommodates them all. So each of them is an out with, is to each other. No? So they're exposed, they're not at home. None of them can be at home. Otherwise, there is no point in saying we can attend to each other as objects among objects. So but the logos, or the dual logics, these contraposed logics that Serres is trying to think with regard to the gnomon, or the mathematical mentality, is perhaps a bit as if we would say the concepts or the objects, they're being sculpted out. So what we engage with, if we try to develop boundings, no, from the outside and from the inside, so across this transcendental line, the mathematical line, which we need to cross in order to be inventive, but when crossing it, nobody can follow us. It's not reasonable. But we can bring something back from having crossed it, with which we can figure things out with great beauty and unexpected sensibilities, let's say. So then the concepts are what is being sculpted, and the way how sculpture is being conveyed, so the art, how the art of making such mathematical articulation, such silent words that are sculpted, conveyable, is by giving the negative forms. So the experimentation is about working out negative forms that can propagate these artistic concepts. No? So concepts don't have, so concepts, if they are artistic, they don't reproduce, they don't have genealogies. Yeah, so there is something timeless at work in it. And this timeless is it's not just an interest to return to an earlier age of pre-modern science with metaphysics. So the role of light with quantum physics, the role of light with regard to our communication technology, to our information technology, indeed works with something that sounds as metaphysical as it can. No? So light has the double character of being massive and being photonic. The photons are, by definition, that which has no mass. It's light for which there is no time. It's light that is literally outside of time. It's eternal, the photons. The photons have no temperature. This is what stands behind the understanding or the interest in the incandescent in Serres, because the photons, this is a kind of, it has no temperature. If it has no mass, it has no temperature. So it's Ingeborg Bachmann, when she speaks of a cold conception, so this to reconnect with this time, with this massless and timeless thing that is at work in light, no, when we communicate, and literally, the channels that actually convey the signals that are translated from my words into light in no time to China. These cables are optical cables. They're fiber optical cables. It's optics which does this. So optics means the physics of light. So sculpture in the transcendental. Concepts would be what is figured out, and then the crafting of the negative forms. This becomes a way to contemplate or to work with the whole cosmos, with all of physics. So if you make such a form, you need to consider everything. How it can be stabilized, how it can be taken off. This interest in a methodic exteriority, how to engage with a dimension of form that remains entirely exterior to what it contains, like the jars of tears, the jars with respect to the tears in Ingeborg Bachmann, and yet produce a coupling, and yet produce well, a figure, a statue which now needs to be placed within logos. This was the request with which I started from Serres. A general treatise on sculpture that can play where logics is dual and contraposed, such that statues can be accommodated within logos. So they are they are within logos. They're crafted by quantitative, physical, formal elements, and yet they are figured out. And even here, it's about, so then when you want to reproduce a form like this, you need to pour hot metals. So what to do such that it doesn't burn? These are like arteries that can keep it cold, such that the whole structure, when it goes into the oven, will actually produce the figure. So with this interest, in a general treatise of sculpture, in one way or the other, what is at stake is an order of generality, an Allgemeinheit, something that pertains to things in general, but is not science in the modern analytical sense only. That involves it, but is not only. Like philology involves logos, but it cannot be derived out of a logics. With this figure, perhaps, this is a more abstract way of relating to I use it to index the same kind of ideation, of fabulation, perhaps, I'm not sure. But this now is from a book on mathematics. It's by a mathematician, by somebody who titled it Figures of Thought, Mathematics and Mathematical Texts. What he was interested in was, how do people who in mathematics open up new abstractions, new domains of abstractions, so who, if you want, cross the mathematical line where nobody can follow them, and then how can they bring it back? How do they need to write? What would be the literary genre, the format? What is it? What has it been for the ones who brought things back from across the mathematical line? So he studied the texts by Descartes, by Hilbert, of course, so old from antiquity as well, by a selection of I think about 6 mathematicians that really pushed the limits to new heights of abstraction. How were they writing about it? So he does something like text linguistics on mathematical writing, and the key notion with which he keeps working is that of figures of thought. And here I have just one of many beautiful abstract ideas of how to approach this. He writes, figure is the context in which definition and delimitation are the same thing. For to give a definition of a figure is to give its boundary, and to give its boundary is to give the figure as a definition and as a boundary. So these when we, with respect to this mathematical line, it's about silent articulation or statuesque words that are made entirely. So in terms of how they are made, no, so in the sense of a treatise, not an explanation of the meaning, but how does it figure? It can be addressed entirely from within the logos. But within the logos does not give an exhaustive legitimization or explanation of it. That's the idea with this. So it's a kind of combination between literary reason and mathematical thinking. It's a kind of an interiorization. So this architectonic thinking, it's not an architectonic, if it were to unfold towards the outside world, it would be a conquest story. No? So it's a dominant mentality which begins to take space, not to claim spaces. But because of this silence in the mathematical thinking, it's rather an involution, no? An infolding. So it's an architectonic that concerns the infolding of one's thinking. And why is it important today? No? So why this attention again? I mean, my interest is not primarily in theology or in something like that, or neither was Simone Weil's, no, with this emphasis on an aspect of spirituality and thought that we have, or the modern philosophy, modern science has believed it can leave away, no, and in order to reconnect with that in philosophy, there is this notion of the out with that I tried to talk about. So the out with. It's which focuses on the craft, which focuses on the making of things and on the bodily experience, rather than trying to identify with what it contemplates. So it's a kind of I also called it a cosmic self, but it's a self which cannot become subject. No? So a self that relates to its variegated self as objects among objects. So it's a self that cannot say I. That's what I try to think, and which I certainly don't have. All I'm doing here is storytelling in a direction like this. And why is it important? Because what we experience very drastically, I think, in everything that we relate to the Anthropocene, to environmental humanities, to these pressing and urgent new ways of attending to nature in its cyclical, in its cyclic, in its in terms of sustainability, in terms of recycling, in terms of combining the object, so the rational, the reasonable with the cyclical. That's what I understand to be the main challenge of our contemporary condition. No? Algorithms, computations, all of these things, all our abstractions, quantum physics, they are oscillating, they are going in cycles, but we need forms of rationalization in order to be responsible, to act responsible in that. And one way that this beautiful paper yesterday actually introduced, I was very much, it struck me very, very strongly when you said that. No, science is taking residence within us. So this is when Serres speaks of the change of the role of languages. So he emphasizes mathematics, physics, information theory, not as a realization of a linguistic paradigm in a subject, in an idealism, but rather the opposite. He says he celebrates in many occasions, most drastically in the five senses, of course, how a certain colonial role of language is finally being disempowered with information theory. So there is a great attention to the quantitative and to a physics of information, but nevertheless, this sentence, no, science eradicates language. That's how he puts it. Science eradicates language. It feels very scary. It feels very scary to really think what that entails. And I think that the complementing figure is to think like this. So science is eradicating. No, he says there's a substitution taking place in which science eradicates language. Eradicate means to uproot, no? So to disconnect with history, to disconnect with genealogies. But this uprooting can be addressed through through a philology that works in play with a kind of a poetics that combines literary reason and mathematical thinking. And then we can say, okay, getting used to this is a bit as if science is taking residence within us. How can we accommodate it? That would be then the ethical question. How can we accommodate science? Not how does science make life easy for us, or how does it dominate us? How can it play among the convivium, no, the cosmic convivium, in which a new, no, Serres speaks of hominescence. No, it's not a new humanism. It's a becoming human, and a becoming human that works with science and mathematical thinking, but never independent of literary reason. So not legitimization, storytelling, fabulation become very important. I would like to, yeah, they're too technical. I would like to end perhaps with two things. One, by Michel Serres, in the Incandescent, and to me, really, it is the book where he addresses to physics of light. Physics of light, so to the photons, to this massless part of light, because he's coming back again and again to a whiteness, and this whiteness here, I think we need to think of it with metaphysical gesture, not as a metaphysics, because this, no, Serres has the beautiful citation, the only principle of reason can be that there is no principle of reason. No, I'm not sure if I remember this correctly, but it's something like that. So just a gesture of metaphysics, not make a doctrine out of it. A doctrine out of it would be to build a house to the outside, not to edify an inside, no, not the involution. So he writes, the white relation. We don't maintain any definite relation with the apeiron or with these sites or objects, except that through a kind of symmetry or face-to-face, they require us in our entirety, without any bound of any kind, without any work program or specialty program, without any specially cut out organ or faculty. We think about them with all our floating and indefinite attention. We remember them with all our vague memory. We imagine them without any image. We attach our reason to them without any reason. We apprehend them with our seven senses. Our entire body bathes in them. Bones, muscles, genitals, and skin. We desire them, love them with all our heart, await them for all our soul. A flame suddenly burns in us, melting our focalizations into a single one, indefinite in turn. We go back up to our own incandescence. Like the subject, the object becomes apeiron. Like its object, the subject itself becomes apeiron. Translucency upon translucency, nothing separates them. What living thing constructs this white relation like this? My feeling is that this would be life itself. Huh? So life itself as a living thing. In many ways, this is what I have been circling around with this attention again to cosmos. So we have Gaia, we have all these ways of relating to the living reality of the earth, but there's a, so it's not just a body, it's also a soul that relates to it. So the last words, I want to give them again to Ingeborg Bachmann. She has a beautiful poem. So if, so the white relation is constructed by living things. What is there left to do if one loves words? if one is friends with words? She writes, Ihr Worte, auf mir nach, Und sind wir auch schon weiter, zu weit gegangen? Geht es noch einmal weiter? Zu keinem Ende geht's. Es hält nicht auf. Das Wort wird doch nur andere Worte nach sich ziehen, Satz den Satz. So möchte Welt endgültig sich aufdrängen, schon gesagt sein. Sagt sie nicht. Worte mir nach, das nicht endgültig wird, nicht diese Wortbegier und Spruch auf Widerspruch. Lasst ihr eine Weile jetzt keines der Gefühle sprechen, den Muskelherz sich anders üben. Lasst, sage ich, lasst, kein Sterbenswort, ihr Worte. Gut, damit bin ich am Ende. Vielen Dank.